Horror, an intense feeling of fear, shock, or disgust. Some people avoid these feelings like the plague, but others seek it out, addicted to it, devote their whole lives to it. But regardless of what side you're on, or even somewhere in the middle, no one can deny that even just a little bit of horror can be really fun. And you know what else is fun? Video games. When combining the two, you can create some of the greatest games of all time. But it's not always easy. Horror has so many subtleties and nuances that some people just can't get to grips with. But there are those chosen few games that rise above the rest, making themselves staples of late October gaming sessions, living on the shelves or hard drives of horror fans all over the world. But which horror games do it well? How do they do it well? That's what I'm hoping to discuss today. So here are 5 games that, in my opinion, did horror really, really well. Visage. Developed and published by Sad Square Studio and clearly inspired by PT. Without spoiling the plot, if you're not aware, you start the game with a cutscene from the perspective of someone who is murdering their whole family. After the harrowing experience, you wake up in what I can only assume is a very expensive house. After receiving a call from your nosy neighbour, you discover your front door is locked, you've misplaced your keys, and a gaggle of ghastly ghouls are determined to stop you from finding them. You are then tasked with going through multiple chapters, with each chapter focusing on different occupants of the house over the years, and the effects that these ghouls have had on them. Since ghosts are typically unfazed by bullets or being cracked in the head with a piece of wood, there is no combat in Visage, with gameplay primarily being about managing your sanity and solving puzzles while running away or avoiding the deadly apparitions, with key items being collected throughout the game's chapters. Now, there's many things that make Visage a good horror game, but the most obvious being its graphics and level design. Beautifully crafted in an Unreal Engine, Sad Square created a hauntingly realistic game. The furniture looking like you could actually sit on it, beds left unmade, photos and kids' colourings plastering the walls of bedrooms, plates and cutlery left lying around the kitchen, and picture frames decorating the walls of the sitting room and hallways. The house feels like it's been lived in for many years before we even got a chance to look around. The memories of previous residents living on within its walls. Then you have the sanity meter, the need for candles and light bulbs to effectively illuminate your way through the dark corridors creates this growing sense of dread. Feeling the adrenaline course through your body and your heart race each time a candle burns out or a bulb blows, knowing the more your sanity decreases, the more paranormal experiences you are going to encounter. Now, I'm not gonna lie to you, I struggled getting through this one. Not because the game is bad, but quite the opposite. The game is too good. Every corner comes with the creeping sense of fear, the uncertainty of what's waiting for you. Will you find a well-lit room with a candle and some matches? Or will you find a twitching, repulsive nightmare, barely visible under the flickering light, ready to acquaint itself with your larynx before you even get a chance to think? Outlast, developed by Red Barrel Studio and originally released in 2013, you play as a freelance investigative journalist. After receiving an anonymous email informing you of inhumane experiments being performed on the patients of Mount Massive Asylum, a psychiatric hospital owned by the shady Murkoff Corporation. After seeing the extreme amount of blood and human body parts used to furnish the rooms and halls of the hospital, it's very clear things are way worse than you could have imagined, and it's up to you to discover the truth of Mount Massive Asylum. Similar to Visage, Outlast doesn't feature weapons or combat. Armed only with your video camera and an assortment of AA batteries to fuel your camera's night vision, your focus is on staying out of sight and solving puzzles as you make your way through the labyrinthine asylum, collecting documents, recording important moments, and not being caught by deformed monstrosities with their Wilsons hanging out. Although the game was Red Barrel's first release, the studio showed quite quickly that they had a good grasp on the feelings they wanted to portray. The isolated and defenseless feeling of being trapped in a maze with the tortured husks of what was once human. The pure panic and paranoia of trying to preserve precious battery life while also trying everything in your power to spend as little time in the dark as possible. And the absolute jarring actions of the residents accumulate in a sometimes disturbing and disgusting display of horror that shot fear and joy into the hearts of players the world over. There was nothing quite like it when it first released. It was so good, in fact, that it received a DLC, a sequel, a comic book, and countless imitations. I never owned a gaming PC or any other form of computer that could run games, so I never got to play games like Amnesia: The Dark Descent when it came out. So my first experience with that kind of horror was with Outlast, and it hit me like a truck. I loved it. It was the first horror game I got to play on my PS4, and I'll never forget my first time entering Mount Massive Asylum. Excitement coursing through my veins, ready for the next generation of horror, only to spend the next few hours hiding in a locker until I had built up the courage to push forward and see it through to the end, with regular breaks to spend more time in lockers, mind you. The Last of Us, developed by Naughty Dog and published by Sony Interactive in 2013. You play as the hunky brooding dad Joel Miller, set in post-apocalyptic America, with the world overrun by fans of the nu metal band Mushroomhead, also known as fungus zombies or simply the infected. 20 years after the outbreak, you've become a smuggler, tasked with getting things in and out of the quarantine zone in Boston without getting caught by whatever military is left trying to maintain order. Joel and his partner are then given the job of getting teenage girl Ellie to a group called the Fireflies in the Massachusetts State House. Along the way, you discover Ellie has been bit by one of the infected but appears to be immune to the virus. The Last of Us uses a third-person perspective with large portions of the gameplay having you traverse towns, buildings, forests, and of course, sewers, as well as using shooting and stealth mechanics to fight or get away from the many survivors or infected that would like to show you the benefits of your organs being out on the floor. The Last of Us excels in its environmental storytelling, the horror of a broken, desperate world giving us places we can instantly recognize or relate to, but turning them into dilapidated and broken husks of what they used to be. A home once bursting with love and life, now a tomb for its occupants from an era now past, or a supermarket once stocked as high as the ceiling, now left empty as looters and survivors have ransacked every drop of water and crumb of food they could find. Notes found in some of the areas detail the final days of people that have now passed, making this world feel as alive and as hopeless as possible. And then we have the fear of the human condition. How much can you trust a stranger? What could they do to you? And how far are you willing to go to ensure they don't? As an awkward teen, I was obsessed with zombie films. Films like Shaun of the Dead and 28 Days Later kept me up for many a night, and games like Dead Rising and Resident Evil distracted me from homework for hours. So when The Last of Us released, it was like a breath of fresh air. Sure, it was still zombies technically, but it brought a new twist with it, and focusing the story and gameplay around the characters' survival and dependence on each other instead of making the infected the focal point really made it stand out against its contemporaries, and also gave similarities to The Walking Dead, which came out with its 4th season not long after the game's release. This game was a masterclass in nuance, suspense, and story writing in my opinion, and holds up even 11 years later in 2024. Until Dawn. Developed by Supermassive Games and published by Sony Interactive Studios in 2015, originally intended to be a first-person PS3 game using the wannabe Wiimote, the PlayStation Move. Revolving around a group of friends, a year after a tragic accident happened, leaving 2 sisters of the group missing and presumed dead, their brother Josh invites the friends back to the cabin at which the accident occurred to commemorate the loss of his sisters. And even though most of the friends are fully aware of how weird this is, they agree anyway, but things quickly fall into chaos for the group atop the isolated snow lodge, with the game playing homage to a number of different horror concepts, most notably the slasher and paranormal genre, with obvious influences being the likes of Scream, Poltergeist, and The Evil Dead. The gameplay for Until Dawn is very much in the same vein as other PlayStation games such as Heavy Rain and Detroit Become Human, or even comparable to Telltale's games like The Walking Dead or The Wolf Among Us. You spend a lot of time exploring locations, looking for clues to uncover the various mysteries atop the mountain, solving puzzles and making various choices that affect the outcome of the story, with the ability to in one way or another save or kill each character, making the game very replayable to see how each outcome affects the story and the various characters within. Until Dawn fills the player with both fear and suspense in its story, with gameplay drifting from character to character through several chapters, knowing each action could ultimately come back to bite you in the ass. Making these decisions is horrifying in itself. With the addition of a timer for each decision, it's sure to make you panic. To add to the game's horror, the artwork and gameplay allude to the basic primal fears of humanity. What's looking in the shadows? What were those sounds from the basement? And the fear of the unknown. Several jump scares are scattered throughout the game and triggered with brilliant timing using the at times tense atmosphere. Storytelling and subtle twists also help create the ominous tone. Now, don't get me wrong, I know there's a lot of people out there that didn't like this game or thought the story was bad or lazy, and I'm not here to tell you that you're wrong, but I do disagree. The story had atmosphere, intensity, and intrigue in spades. It was the perfect blend of seriousness and camp that encapsulated the slasher trend of the 80s and 90s, with characters you'll either love or love to kill. And the gameplay is perfect if you enjoy being able to take in the story of a game or want to sit around the TV with your friends or your partner making predictions as to who the killer may be, who will die next, and what you could have done differently. Which also speaks to its replayability. I've been a fan of this style of game since Heavy Rain on the PS3, and Until Dawn is interactive narrative at its best in my opinion. I love horror as a whole, I love campy slasher films, and I love narrative heavy games. That's not to say I'm completely blind to its flaws like Man of Medan, but there's a magic to these games you can't get anywhere else, and when Supermassive do it well, they do it exceedingly well. Silent Hill 2, developed by Team Silent and published by Konami way back in 2002. You play as James Sutherland after just arriving at the titular Silent Hill after receiving a letter from your wife, who has supposedly been dead for 3 years, so it leaves us to assume that she used the worst postal service ever. Once you've made your way into the town, you quickly realise all is not as it seems, with all manner of grotesque monsters looking to give you the royal welcome, and anyone you meet not looking to kill you seems to be having just as bad a time as you are. Silent Hill's gameplay focuses heavily on puzzle solving and very clunky combat, with separate difficulty options for both. There's also a distinct lack of HUD in this game too, allowing each fight to grow more and more intense as you have no idea where your health is or how much ammo you have left. Although the first 4 Silent Hill games were all amazing in their own right, 2 was its absolute best, because instead of focusing on some weird cult and the monstrosities being real, it made alternate versions of itself depending on the character's mental state, their guilts, their demons. It taps into the most basic of human emotions and makes us face them head on. Honestly though, I could talk at length about what makes this game so beautifully terrifying. Its atmosphere and sound design is superb. Every step, every creak, even the static on your radio signaling that an enemy is drawing near builds the suspense and your anxiety. The music haunts you with a heavy sense of melancholy, and each monster is so purposefully designed that without any words it can portray exactly everything you need to know. I can't lie to you though, my first experience of it was hiding behind my brother's back when I was like 6, screaming at him to run away and stay in the safe area where nothing could get him. And when I finally got to play, it took me ages to finally finish. I felt amazing when I finally did, but I just couldn't handle the tension and paranoia. I loved being scared and I loved Silent Hill, but it was just too much at times. Not to mention it was bloody hard. The combat, hard. The puzzles, hard. And the nurses made me... Sorry, getting carried away now. What I'm trying to say is Silent Hill 2 was a masterpiece for its time, which is exactly why people like us are still talking about it over 20 years later. And with a remake on the way, I can't wait to dive into that world one more time. So, that's the video. What games do you think done horror well? Let me know in the comments, and if you enjoyed this video, clicking like and subscribe would be massively appreciated. Thank you for watching.